The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining today. My name is Wes Dillingham. I am the Vice President of Customer Success for Crm Group. We have a CRM product called the Lead Tool, Sales Management Tool. And I'm going to be talking today, I'm going to be covering part 2 of my webinar on not getting the results you expected from your CRM. Here's why. And I've kind of approached this from a different angle than maybe any attendees would have expected. Again, this is part 2. So part 1, we'll recap here in a second, but I just want to clarify kind of how I'm approaching this. The key here is that I'm laying out my 3 phases for implementing software, and within each of those phases is the foundation for getting the results that you want or that you expect. So if you've already implemented your CRM or implemented a software program, you don't have to start over. You may want to, and you may want to, start with phase 1 or phase 2. But just pick out some of the key points from each phase and reintroduce your CRM with some of these key foundational points in place. And I'll point those out as we go along here. But I just didn't want to confuse anybody because I am really talking about how to implement your CRM to maximize results. Some of you may have attended thinking, I need to troubleshoot or I need to identify some key ways to get the results I want now that I've already implemented it after the implementation or the introduction process. So just want to clarify that, but I'm going to hit on recap phase 1 of introducing your software program, and then we're going to spend most of the time on phase 2 and 3, and I'll highlight some of those key foundational things that you want to have in place in order to maximize the results that you get from your CRM. So let's go ahead and get started by recapping last week. So 2 weeks ago. So I began part 1 of this webinar by discussing what is a CRM. So let's define what a CRM is. According to Wikipedia, CRM stands for Customer Relationship Management. And it's an approach to managing a company's interaction with current and potential customers. It uses data analysis about customers' history with the company, and it's meant to improve business relationships with customers, specifically focusing on customer retention and ultimately driving sales growth. So that's sort of the foundational definition of what relationship or what customer relationship management is. And then here's what executives tend to use their CRM for, the use cases in accordance with by percentage of executives. I think it was 500 executives polled. 94% saw it as contact management, 65% lead nurturing, 59% email marketing, 59% sales forecasting, customer service, information management, and sales tracking. So there's your why CRMs are introduced within companies. So with that, these are the 3 phases of introducing a CRM to your company. So these are the 3 phases I use when implementing software or a CRM to a company. We've got the discovery phase, which that's where we spent most of our time last week. We will walk through that a little bit today. So that results in the purchase of a solution, much of the preparation for your implementation, including who it will impact and how success will be determined. You also will talk a lot about the why. Why do you need a CRM? Phase 2 is implementation. This includes customizing the software, introducing the software, training, and anything else related to getting your team ready to use the software. And we'll dig into that a little bit here. And then support and follow-up. Anything and everything post-implementation, troubleshooting, tweaking process, uh, and or the software setup, additional training, etc. I did forget to mention, if you do have any questions, you are on silent mode, so please feel free to type your questions in, and we'll get to those as soon as we have a moment to. So there are your three phases. Let's kind of recap phase one. Again, it's the discovery phase. Who, what, why, when, and how is what we're covering here. And it's imperative to understand the why, understand why you're buying a CRM before you actually go out and buy the product. I mentioned this quote last week. Brian Gardner wrote a book called ROI from CRM. It's a great book. If you're implementing a CRM, it will help dig deep into all the phases and all the details of how he recommends you approach that process. But he does mention in his book, when companies go looking for process improvements, they often throw money at technology with the hope it will do the job. But it's critical to first understand the process behind the needed change. So you really want to understand, why do I need a CRM before you go out and you buy one. So don't adopt the software solution without understanding the problem you're having, the problem you're trying to solve with it. Enterprise software is a tool which creates efficiencies around a business issue. It rarely solves the problem by itself. So you're going to want to build a workflow or specific process, sales process, or customer journey in conjunction with your software solution in order to provide a comprehensive solution to the business issue. So that's one of the keys to getting better results, is building out a customer journey in conjunction with your software. So think of it like a map for your users uh, to follow when leading clients from first meeting them to then leading them to or getting them to the closing table and everything in between, all the steps that happen in between. So you need to give your users a clear reason why they need the CRM, and a clear map or clear direction on how they use it and how they get the results that and meet the expectations and goals that are being set forth to accomplish with the CRM. Next, in this phase, you want an implementation team. So you've determined why. You may have determined what, but the implementation team is also important to have in place when you're choosing the product. So maybe you've determined why. Now you put together your team to go out, research products, choose the product, build your sales processes, and so on. And we'll talk about that here. So you've got to determine a point person and a team of people. I personally believe the more people that you involve in the process of choosing the product, building the processes, who are going to be impacted by the product, impacted by the change, the more people that you use. So if you're using a CRM to improve your sales processes, improve your sales results, you want to use your sales people to on this team, or a few of them on this team of people. So this team of people is responsible for everything, including the product, choosing the product, determining key metrics and measuring results, communicating with the entire company at every phase, and executing the change that's occurring, or the CRM implementation. Again, though, if this team, you want to use people that are going to be impacted by the change on your team, your point team, and your implementation team. Finally, you want to communicate the scope of the change in the project. So we'll get into this a little bit more in phase two. But once you've established your team, once they've determined the why, they've chosen the product, and they began building the process, and as well as determining what metrics they're going to use to determine success or failure, then you want to basically communicate with everybody and begin building out your schedule, your plan, which leads us to phase two. So phase two, I call implementation. So it's the actual introduction of the product, and everything from that introduction to the go live date, everything that happens in between that initial announcement, initial introduction to that go live date. So you're going to announce the scope and timeline of the project. You're going to set up the software and any integrations that go with it. You're going to want to do a test run of the CRM with users who are actually going to be using the system, and then you want to train everybody else and begin preparing everybody for that go live date. So I like to call it an announcement date, but you can call it whatever you want. But the announcement date is sort of that initial day that you announce to the company the project and the tentative schedule of events, including a go live date. So that's sort of your bookend to this date, your go live date. So we're talking about this implementation phase is everything that's happening in between those two dates. So this includes, like I said, you want to basically build out a schedule and a timeline. In that timeline, you want to include setting up the product in conjunction with the new workflow and the new process. You want to test that product with your team that's using, or the team that's implementing the project or the CRM. Or maybe you pull a couple users from the group that you're going to be training to test it out, play with it, use it in conjunction with the new sales process, and get their feedback, tweak as necessary before you dive into the next phase, which is training. And the training is just everything you want to do to get your team ready for that go live date. Training, I usually break into bite-sized pieces. So we start with just basics, and then we'll hold a class on maybe more advanced features and functionality. But the key here is who's training your users. Most people rely on their vendor. There's nothing wrong with that. Your vendor obviously knows the software better than anybody, but your vendor doesn't know your team. They don't know your processes. They don't know your business as well as you do. So I personally feel if you have your implementation team also be your trainers as well as your internal support, which I'll speak to here in a minute, I feel you're going to get more out of, you're going to get better adoption, you're going to get better training, you're going to get better results when you have an internal team that not only does the training piece, but they also provide internal support. I believe you're going to get much better results. Obviously, lean on your vendor, use your vendor as much as you need to. Your vendor will probably be involved in building that team, training that team of implementation team, and helping them. But I always find it better to have one person from the company, from your company, that works with one person from the vendor, and then your individual users has a layer of support people, or they use that implementation team as their layer of support and training and whatnot. You also want to make sure that everybody understands not just the software program, but that they're learning it in context with the new process, as well as any integrations that come with it, as well as just in a practical, real life situation, something that they're going to experience on a day-to-day. You don't want your individual users to hear a training from the vendor and then get back to doing what they do every day, working with clients and interacting with clients, and it not the two not be able to merge together and make sense for your users. If your users don't experience the product in a practical real life scenario and they don't understand it as it fits into their day to day, it's going to be difficult for them to adopt. It's going to create more time in their learning curve. They're basically going to reinvent their own personal process to try to introduce the software, or they're just not going to use the software. They're going to go back to the way they've always done things. So again, like I said, you really want to have your internal, or if it's not your implementation team, you want to have internal support available for training, available for supporting your users once the product is live and everybody's supposed to be using it. So again, remember that in this phase, it's basically everything leading up to that go live day or week. It doesn't have to be a day. And the bottom line of this day or week is it's just the deadline of when everybody should be prepared and ready to use the new CRM, and they should be able to stop using any old system or stop using any old processes um, as far as this day or this week is concerned. So it's either a phase out week or a cutoff day when everybody's stopping using the old way and starting to use the new way, whatever makes the most sense for implementing. But it's key to set very clear expectations as to what this day represents and what you are expecting your users, your salespeople, or your team to how you expect them to act going forward from that day or week or whatever the time frame may be. So let's move into phase 3. Phase 3 is support and follow up. So really phase 3, and I mentioned this in the original, the first webinar, part 1. I'll reiterate it here in part 2. And that is, if you've really done your homework and really put a lot into those first 2 phases, phase 3 should really be relatively smooth. If the first 2 stages were disorganized and messy, this phase will likely be difficult. And because this phase basically is from go live date or week till the entire history of the product or the CRM within your organization. So if everybody's not ready on that go live date, it's going to be rough going here after. So, and that may be where you're at now. You may be in phase 3 post go live date, and you're not getting the results you expected, and that's why you're on this webinar. So with that, you want to implement some of these things that we've talked about in phase 1 and 2. The biggest is really just using internal support for training and feedback, and getting that feedback as much as possible. So what I like to do is basically your first 90 days after go live is sort of that first stage of this phase. And so the first really 30, 60, and 90 days, I would hold weekly to bi-weekly meetings to evaluate the progress and iterate any issues or problems and their solutions. You'll want to tweak your process. Your process isn't going to be perfect as it's put to the test in a practical way. Your users are going to have feedback, and you want to get their feedback. And you also want to make sure they're providing resolution, not just complaining. So you'll make those changes. Anything you can do to ease friction points your users are experiencing and communicating to you. But the bottom line is you want to give your users a voice to express how they're feeling about things, and also any feedback that they have. But you also, like I said a minute ago, you want to make sure they're providing solutions. And then huge key here is addressing those issues very quickly. So if it's an issue with the process, we got to tweak it and fix it. If it's an issue with the CRM or the software product, uh, if we can make adjustments, we make adjustments. But if we can't, then we need to figure out how that's going to fit into our process, um, and get things fixed and established that they're fixed as soon as possible. As we mentioned before, you want to have your internal support team in prepared and ready. So don't, like I said before, don't necessarily rely on your software vendor. You may need to in certain circumstances, and that's fine. And I mentioned it's much better if there is one company point of contact with one vendor point of contact, and you're not sending all of your users to the vendor, because then your vendor is not only getting all the feedback that you want and you need to make decisions and tweak things, but they're also giving your users answers that aren't in context with how your users do business every day. They're just giving your users answers related to how to use a software product. And again, this goes back to building out a very, very good sales process, customer journey in conjunction with your CRM. It's so much better too if you're having trouble with the product. So you're pretend like you're one of the users and you're having trouble with the product, and you can turn to your buddy who's the internal support and internal expert and ask a question, and they will give you a quick answer right then and there, and it's going to be related to how you guys do business, related to your process. If it's too complicated, then yeah, you got to involve the vendor. But the more you can do internally, the better, because it gets answered quickly. The feedback is going to somebody who can actually do something about it, in relation to the company and the context of the business and whatnot. So it's just much better to have that internal person, who can get questions answered quickly. And that's the other thing, the speed of getting answers. Sometimes your vendor's not available. Sometimes they need to do a little research, ask a lot of questions back and forth to make sure they understand the problem, that kind of thing. So it's just usually much faster, much quicker. The feedback is all getting recorded and responded to when it's internal. But again, if something's too complicated, you definitely involve the vendor. Finally, measuring results. So you should have a clear and realistic set of measurable goals throughout the timeline of the implementation, as well as post go live date. So you want to have goals set for 30, 60, 90, 180 days, um, into a year, and so on. So you just want to make sure you're monitoring the results as you go. So you have those clear, timely goals in place, and everybody should be aware of them. Uh, and everybody should be on board and continually communicated with the time frame of achieving different metrics and different goals. The one mistake a lot of people make in a CRM implementation in any software is that they measure success based on their user engagement, so to speak, or are their users logging in, and that's the only measurable goal. Is, hey, our users logged in this month? They all logged in. That's great. We don't know what they put in the system. We don't know how they use the system, but they all logged in, and that's the only thing we're measuring. That's a terrible way to measure the success of your CRM or your software, because if your users catch wind that that's all you're looking for, they will simply log in, and if they don't think you're going to hold them accountable for what's being entered into the system, they don't think they're going to be held accountable for following the process that's been put in place. And really, the bottom line is, if they're not, if using the system is optional in any way, shape, or form, you're going to run into a ton of resistance. It really, the system should be an expectation of employment, and what is entered into the system should be very clear in that customer journey. When the system is supposed to be used should be very clear again in that customer journey. And then the metrics and goals that have been established to measure the success, not only of the product, but of the process and the goals you're trying to achieve, because you're adding this new element of efficiency and this new element of to your business, should be very clear and understood by your users. So at this point in the process, if users are not logging in and using the CRM in the new process correctly, you've missed a few steps, and that may be where you're at now, and that's why you're listening to this webinar. If that's the case, then just take a few steps back. Reestablish some of the key things that I brought up here. I think one of the biggest is building an internal group of users to facilitate the implementation. So if your users, if the people who are going to be using the product are the ones who choose the product, are the ones who choose the implementation schedule, if they're the ones who build the process in conjunction with the product, if they're the ones who facilitate the training, the support, the go live date, the post go live date, if they're involved in every single step leading up to the actual usage and accomplishing the goals, even establishing the goals and metrics, if they're involved, they don't have to be the ones who decide everything, but if they're involved in the decision-making process, they're basically, if they don't use the product, they're basically rejecting their own input, their own opinion. So it's important to establish that group of people, allow them to lead the company through these different phases, and then they really are going to have less to argue with, less to resist. And they're going to feel like they were part of it instead of it being something that was handed down to them. A lot of this is just psychology and treating people the way you would want to be treated, so to speak. The golden rule is what I like to call it. But just take a couple steps back. If you're having trouble getting the results, just take a couple steps back, implement some of these ideas. That one in particular, which including your users, is always going to create better buy-in than just giving them something to use. And going forward, you got to continue to over communicate. I think that's one of the biggest things that people struggle with is a lot of people are in the dark throughout. They find out about it, they speculate on it. Once it's introduced, the product's introduced, they're already upset and frustrated because they haven't been involved. Again, that's what I just said will eliminate that issue. So again, continuing to communicate, continuing to evaluate everything that's going on. What is working? What is not? What issues are we addressing? How are we addressing them? What metrics are we achieving? Which ones are we not achieving, and why? And then communicating keys, the communication key is ask. Just have meetings periodically. Ask people what's going wrong, what's not working, what's the solution, and then create a solution. Address that solution as quickly as possible. So software implementation is like any other culture shift or paradigm change. I think I've mentioned this in other webinars and other blogs. Implementing a software, especially CRM, it's a culture shift. You're not only just adding a software product to what your folks are going to do every day, you're creating a complete shift in how they do their job every day, and that's a big deal. You want to be really sensitive to that. And a CRM is more than just a sales tool. It really is the central nervous system of your business. It impacts so many more departments than maybe just your sales team, and you need to you need to recognize that when implementing the software. It's going to have an impact on your marketing. It's going to have an impact on your customer service. It's a way to gather data and information about your business, about your sales process, about your customers, about your salespeople. So there's a ton of things that you're going to get out of this, and that's why CRMs are so popular. So for those of you who have, again, those of you who have already implemented a CRM, you don't have to start over. You can just take a few steps back and pick out some of the key points here that happen in each of these phases. For those of you who are implementing a CRM, you haven't started yet, or maybe you have the product, you bought the product, but you're looking to make sure your implementation goes well. Follow these phases, pick out some of these key points to the phases, and use those as you implement your software. So you can contact me if you have any questions after the webinar here. You can contact me at my email address here, wes@formegroup.com. Or you can also learn more about our company here at the following tools, resources here: Facebook, Twitter, our website, etc. And with that, I will go ahead and conclude. I appreciate everybody attending today. Thank you so much. Hope you got some key points out of it in implementing software, as well as getting better results from your software. Again, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me. Thanks again, and have a great rest of your day.